Good afternoon. I'm Catherine Satch from the Royal Geographical Society with IBG, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you to our next webinar for geography students on the many career opportunities opened up by studying geography. Today, the session's on finance and management consultancy, although we're going to stretch that a little bit to show some interesting and emerging roles in climate risk and also sustainability. And I'm delighted to be joined by three experts in the field, by Paul, by Nikki, and by Caroline. They're going to introduce themselves in just a moment. And over the next 45 minutes, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, you're going to hear from the three of them offering some insights, some advice, some guidance. There'll be opportunities for you to ask questions. Please post them in the chat into Slido, and Alex, who's been corresponding with you, will be feeding those questions to us. We'll do what we can to answer them during the session, during the webinar, but we'll be following up with an email to all of you later today or tomorrow with some links, some emails, some more guidance and resources, along with the video of this webinar, and we'll pick up some of the questions we can't get to in this particular session. So to start off, I'm going to ask each of the three panelists to just briefly introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about your background. Caroline, I'll turn to you first.
Thanks, Catherine. So yeah, my name's Caroline Francis. I'm a management consultant and I've been practicing for 20 years. I currently work at Accenture as part of our strategy and consulting practice and very much focus on the human and the people side of change. So my focus when I was studying geography as an undergraduate was around people, human, social, economic geography. And I've taken that forward into the work that I now do with clients as a practicing management consultant.
Fantastic.
So really good to meet you today.
Thank you very much for joining us. Nikki, slightly different background. Well, similar background, but slightly different pathway afterwards.
True, yes, no, similar background. Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you. I'm Nikki Van Dyke. I'm an environmental consultant and I specialise in climate risk assessment and adaptation planning. So I have about 15 years experience of doing this. I currently work for Mott MacDonald, which is a fairly sort of big multidisciplinary global engineering consultancy. So my work involves risk assessment and resilience work on a project level, so looking at infrastructure projects, but also working with clients at a much more strategic level, looking at climate risks to their business and the services they offer at sort of a higher level. So yeah, really looking forward to hearing some of your questions later on.
Thank you, Nikki. And Paul.
Hi everyone, I can't see you, but I trust you're all there. I'm a geographer at heart, so background in geography and physical geography, but really kind of specialising in the physical side. I work for a credit rating agency called S&P Global Ratings, and I've got about 10, 11 years experience, I guess. And my role is really leading on research and the application of climate risk data to help improve the clarity of climate risks in credit ratings.
Excellent, thank you. So really nice range of kind of backgrounds across the breadth of geography and also pathways and roles since then. Caroline, I'm going to ask you, each of you, just to talk a little bit more about what you do in your role in terms of what you do on a day-to-day basis, the colleagues you're working with, just to give a bit more sense of kind of the roles that you're actually involved in. Caroline, I'll go to you first, and then Paul, and then Nikki.
Yeah, sure, of course. So I guess through and through, so being a management consultant, we are predominantly client focused, right? So we work with our clients to solve essentially business problems and look for value, and we do that in a data-driven way. Now that's quite a bit of jargon. So I guess essentially what I do on a day-to-day basis, I work directly with clients. So normally one predominantly, and then I may be a subject matter expert at times on other projects as well. We work on projects and they can be anything from short strategy projects, which are kind of 6 weeks long, through to much longer engagements. Like I think my longest engagement with a government client was say 3 years, right? So they can be very short, focused, sharp bits, which are strategy pieces, short, get in there, look at the problem, write the report, get out. Versus much longer term kind of implementations type work. And I guess that's the difference in different types of consultancy that we do, which is Accenture does the full breadth from strategy through to management consultancy, and we're involved in the strategy upfront as well as the implementation, which varies from some of the strategy boutique companies. So on a day-to-day basis, I'll be working with clients. So at the moment, due to COVID, right, we're working from home, but I'm predominantly on client calls, kind of working through how do we plan. Currently, I'm working on an organizational design project. So I'm working up what's the operating model for the client, what's the future organizational design going to be, how is it going to be structured, how are we going to organize ourselves across the organization. So I'm always looking in my role at, how can we support people? How can we make the people change happen? I can work in everything from very small teams to very large teams. So there's also an aspect of, leadership and management in my role of my Accenture team, which is often mixed with clients as well.
Excellent, great. Paul, what would you like to add to that, or in terms of your particular role?
Yeah, so so my background's adaptation and resilience, and I sit within so S&P Global. There are 4 divisions. Ratings is one of those, which consists of about 1,500 or so credit rating analysts, effectively rating about 50 trillion US dollars in debt. Within ratings, there's a team called Sustainable Finance, and that's where I sit. And that's quite nice in the sense that we have a bit of a horizontal role throughout the company, and that means that I get to work with my colleagues in Sustainable Finance, but also with our credit analysts and others as well. So on a day-to-day basis, so I should say a bit more first actually about S&P. So effectively, what S&P does is provide essential intelligence, data, research to the financial markets, and as part of that work, therefore, I undertake research on key themes, adaptation and resilience, of course, being one of them, but also on specific topics as well, and not just myself, but other members of the team do similar roles as well. So research is one element. Another element will be working with companies on undertaking ESG evaluations, so environmental, social, and governance evaluations. So trying to understand how good, from a sustainability perspective, in a broad sense, their company is, not just in terms of their direct operations, but also throughout their value chain as well. So I'll be leading those pieces of research with a number of colleagues helping me doing that. And that, of course, involves liaising with the company, speaking to them, and also kind of mobilizing and managing a team and producing a report and analysis at the same time. Alongside those ESG evaluations, there are also a number of other kind of products and services that we undertake, essentially looking at the sustainability of transactions. So whether that might be a green bond, for example, we may look at how aligned that green bond financing is to existing frameworks and principles. At the same time, as a specialist in adaptation and resilience, I'm also working hard to ensure that we're consistently applying our consideration of climate change and climate risk specifically consistently across the company. So I've got a bit of a broad role, which is quite nice, but that's also true of many of the team in the sustainable finance team more generally.
Great, thank you. Nikki.
Thank you. Yeah, a little bit similar to Caroline, really. As an environmental consultant, I'd work on projects with clients, the same sort of structure, really. I work particularly with a small team of specialists, so climate change resilience specialists. It's a fairly sort of small team of technical people, but we work across the whole of what McDonald, across all the different sectors that the company's involved in, so energy, water, transportation, and we get involved with projects. I say sometimes it's at a sort of scheme level, so when designing a new piece of infrastructure, new road or bridge or something like that, and provide sort of advice really on what the future climate that those projects might exist in and how they should be designed and what we need to do today to make sure that they're resilient to the future. But as I mentioned before, I also work with a number of organisations at a sort of higher level, doing the same kind of thing, really looking at risks from climate change and what they can do about them, but at a higher level. So looking at how their business plans and business strategy could be affected by changes in climate, and putting in place plans to increase their resilience at a company level. So it might be things like how they assess their investments, for example, or what governance practices they have in place to address climate risks. So I kind of work across sectors with lots of different people within the organisation and at different levels within organisations, but it's all tied together by this climate risk assessment and adaptation planning, which is kind of sort of central to everything I do on all my projects.
Great, thank you. I think you've all done a lovely job in that, in kind of drawing out some of those elements as geographers that you're taking into kind of a variety of different projects and applications. So maybe if we kind of change the focus a little bit, and just to start about some more kind of specifics. Many of those who are attending are students at the moment, and they're going to be interested in finding out about how they find out about opportunities, kind of what are the career paths, what's the entry points in. Maybe we'll talk about that first, and then second, we can pick up a second series of questions, which I can see are coming in around internships, placements, what people can do while they're still a student. But maybe just to get a bit more sense, first of all, about career paths, entryways in. Caroline, from your experience, I think you're probably best positioned to kind of sketch a picture, at least to start off with, of what this landscape looks like.
Yeah, so when I speak from a management consultancy perspective, particularly about the Accenture journey, which the most typical journey is to enter as a new graduate into our analyst program. And we have a group of analysts, which are our most recent joiners, as part of the analyst and consulting group, which is a large pool. And then you'll be deployed from that into different parts of the organisation and to work on different projects across different sectors. So that's the major route in. We do offer internships, right? They're actually really, really highly competitive, and I would say probably even more competitive than the actual graduate job themselves, right? So I think there's a question come in saying what type of internships you need for your role. It's definitely not a requirement, right? It's great. The people that we get in through internships do really well in our organization, and typically people that we retain for a long time. So really great talent and great skills. So there is the internship route, there is the industrial placement route, there is the graduate route. But I would also say that after that, so we absolutely do employ people with some experience, right, as we go up through the levels. So it's not that, don't feel disappointed if the internship route or the graduate route doesn't work for you, because there is absolutely still the opportunity to join Accenture later on. And I would say that's pretty similar for the major consultancy organizations.
Great, thank you. Nikki, do you want to talk a little bit? I mean, you're working more in the kind of environmental consulting world. I know you've moved out of that as well. Do you want to sort of just talk a little bit about pathways into that particular field in terms of this kind of more project management consultancy type world?
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. I mean, like most sort of big multidisciplinary organisations, Mott MacDonald also has graduate programmes and the sorts of things that Caroline's talked about. For me personally, my sort of route into this, I didn't go through a graduate programme into consultancy. I was recruited really as a technical specialist. I did a master's in climate change, and the job I got as a graduate was technically specific. It was to join a climate change resilience team and work on climate resilience projects from the offset. Slightly different from a graduate route, which is maybe a bit broader. And like Caroline mentioned, there are graduate schemes where you might move around different departments before deciding whether to specialise. But for me, my experience was actually that I was taken on as a specialist to do a specialist technical role from my master's. And there are certainly people that I work with in my current team who come from that similar type of role route. But there are also those who come from the sort of broader graduate intake and decide after maybe 1 or 2 years that they want to specialise in climate change, risk and resilience. I've got a member in my team at the moment who she's about 3 years post her degree, and she's had a couple of years working in different parts of environmental consultancy at Mott's, and has just decided recently that this is what she wants to specialise in resilience. And she's joined the team and is now working almost full time on resilience projects, having decided that's the route for her.
Great. Paul, what would you like to add?
I guess largely echoing what Nikki and Caroline have said. We have people that come in essentially as research assistants, straight out of degrees, be that kind of undergraduate or postgraduate through a master's perhaps. And then we also have internships. We have specialist programs for credit analysts. So there's a kind of a scheme designed to kind of build experience for those that specialise in kind of credit analysis, which I dare say won't be many of those kind of on this call, but certainly those with an interest in kind of economics or finance more generally, that might be an area that they choose to kind of focus on through their postgraduate study. It very much varies through all levels, and then equally, like Nikki mentioned, we have specialists and direct hires like myself as well coming in with a bit more experience. So it very much varies, but I would say that certainly in my experience, people's backgrounds do kind of vary somewhat. So it doesn't necessarily have to have a geography degree, or an economics degree. There is quite a kind of a broad church, I guess, by way of background here.
Great. A question that often comes up is about very kind of particular skills that are in demand. A couple of you have made reference to kind of data-driven. You've made reference to probably some of the modelling analyses that you might do. I mean, speaking to students coming from a geography background, who've obviously got a fairly broad degree, have been exposed to a number of different kind of methodological frameworks, ways of collecting data. Are there particular skills that you think are in demand or are emerging and likely to be in demand that through the course of their degrees, through other opportunities like dissertations, might be ways to develop some of those kind of skills, those behaviours, those competencies? Anything you might want to offer on that? I think Caroline, sorry, Paul.
No, okay, I'll jump in. Sorry, Caroline.
Please, Paul.
I think it varies, both those kind of qualitative and also kind of quantitative skills. So, and by that I mean kind of being quite comfortable with numbers is always quite helpful. Being also a good communicator. It sounds a bit generic, but I kind of can't echo the importance enough about having kind of good communication skills, because it's often not something that's able to be taught, and it can be quite difficult to pick up. But certainly being able to represent your kind of ultimately your employer and yourself, both kind of internally and externally, and kind of learning those soft skills is quite I think it's quite well valued, because we're always selling to an extent, and being able to hold a conversation and talk kind of competently about your area of expertise, your subject, your project, whatever it might be, is certainly well valued as well, alongside the usual kind of being highly organized and all that other stuff.
Okay, Caroline.
Yeah, so I was just scribbling down a few notes as I was thinking about it, right? So from our perspective, management consultancy, strategic consulting has to be data driven, right? It's the way that we operate now. If you're a management consultant, it has to be data driven in everything and the way we look at our work. So I think definitely that kind of, I remember when I was doing my geography degree, the piece around statistics, numbers, it's incredibly important to what we do. I would also say that an interest in technology is really important. So, reading up around subjects like blockchain, AI, etc., incredibly important to not know the finest details on them, but to be able to talk knowledgeably. And then the big part of what we do often is then to connect our clients to experts within our organization that can do the next level of detail down on it. So have an interest in technology, be data driven. Think a big part of what we do is I'm always working in different teams and moving between teams, pulling teams together to focus on different business problems. So I think demonstrating that you're able to work as part of a team, and then, as Paul was saying, communicate within that team, and to be able to communicate upwards. I'm often working with really senior clients at board level, right? And so the ability to get a message across really succinctly, really quickly, to the point, key, they'll only have a really short amount of time with you, so how do you get your point across quickly? So, and then finally I would add that kind of intellectual curiosity, that kind of growth mindset. I'm continually learning in my job, right? I'm learning new clients, new information, new data, new ways of working all the time. And so you can't land in the career and think, okay, I'm here now. Actually, you're continually evolving, continually learning. Unless you've got that mindset, it's not the career for you. Yeah.
Nikki, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, well, I think most of what I would say has been said already, but I would definitely add a couple of those points.
Good.
I think, Caroline, your point about learning is really important. once you get into a job, things don't stand still. There are new drivers, there are new things happening in the market, new questions that are coming up that clients need answering, and being kind of knowing what's going on and being able to sort of understand from a client perspective what those big drivers are and what are the questions that are going to keep them up at night. Basically, that's a really important skill, to be able to sort of look out in the marketplace, see what's going on, see where the drivers are, is really important. There is, I think, what I do is quite technical in some respects as well, and there are some very specific technical skills that the team I work in value very highly. I think people have already talked about data, but being comfortable with data and being able to work with large data sets is really important in what I do. But also, to echo Paul's point, probably the most important thing is being able to communicate what that data means and be able to tell someone very succinctly what essentially a very large amount of data tells them, and what's the so what for them, what does it mean for them. That's a really important skill, and actually something that's not as easy as it sounds. It's quite easy in some respects to be able to work with data, be comfortable with coding or whatever, and using large data sets, but the ability to turn data into messages that drive action and drive change is quite an important skill.
Excellent, thank you very much. And many of those elements that you've picked out are ones that we often talk about as being associated with kind of the skill set that geographers are developing through the course of their degree, and some of those translator roles, if you like, in terms of being able to move between different communities and different audiences. So that was great. So we've talked a little bit about internships, we've talked a little bit about kind of grad programs, we've talked also about the fact that at least a couple of you have been appointed as technical specialists in terms of you found other ways into your current roles. For those students who may be at different stages, how do they go about finding out about opportunities, kind of understanding kind of what the time frame is in terms of when applications open up over the course of the year? What kind of advice might you give to those who are just starting to research this kind of opportunity, this sort of field in terms of career opportunities? Where to start, where to look for, how to do that research in terms of getting a sense of where they might fit in this particular landscape of kind of different types of roles and different types of opportunities. So any kind of starting points in terms of researching opportunities?
I can jump in first again, if that's all right. I mean, presumably for most students, they'll have their own kind of, through the university, their own career centres and whatever. And that's a great port of call. But certainly I found, and wanting to kind of emphasise the importance of networking, network. It's something that was attempted to be kind of drilled into me whilst I was an undergraduate myself, and I probably didn't take it on board enough actually. But it's true, being able to we can't do it now, or it's a bit more tricky, isn't it, in doing it in person, but certainly follow people on LinkedIn, look at their jobs, how they describe themselves, try and understand a bit more about the companies they work for, look at the company websites, try and understand, because most companies of course will put quite front and center on the web pages about the stuff that they're interested in, the research they're undertaking, who they're working with, etc. Read about companies and understand them, and not least of course, if you do eventually go for an interview with a company, then knowing a bit about them is going to put you in a great position as well. So I would say in the first instance, network, get on LinkedIn, start following people, pick on people whose job you would like, and see what they do, who they follow, and try and learn a bit more about the companies that you're interested in working for and what they do.
Great. Nikki?
Yeah, I think one, possibly before we sort of even get to that stage, one opportunity to really think about careers and jobs is actually when you're choosing a dissertation and finding out whether there's any opportunities to work with industry on dissertation. I know at Mott's and other companies I've worked at previously, we have regularly have we work with universities and with undergraduate and graduate postgraduates to do dissertation work that's relevant to what we're doing, but also relevant to a student. So definitely find out whether there's opportunities to get involved with industry through your dissertation, and yeah, echo Paul again, networking and find out if there are one way I got into it was through the professional institution obviously now a fellow of the RGS, but also quite heavily involved with another professional institution, CIWEM, the Chartered Institute of Water and Environment Management. There are others, there's a whole host of them, but most of them have regional panels, and you can join as a graduate member, get involved. You can join the panel, join the committee, set up events, talks, seminars. That's a really, really excellent, an excellent way in, not only to build your own personal network, but also to kind of to find out more about what some of the professional institutions are up to.
That's really good advice, and of course I'm partisan and I can only promote the RTS, but absolutely there are lots of other professional bodies out there, and in the resources that we'll circulate afterwards we'll include some links to some of those organisations like CIWEM, for example. Caroline.
Yeah, Nikki, really interesting point about the choice of dissertation, right? Because actually I interviewed, so I knew that I wanted to be a financial services management consultant, and I actually interviewed leads in financial services organizations, and through indirectly, right, through understanding what they did and how they worked and what they worked on, and then, kind of grew up a bit of a picture really of what I wanted to be and where I wanted to be. And management consultancy for me was that ideal blend of being able to work across financial services organizations. I've actually worked cross industry, right? But, particularly in financial services, being able to work across the breadth within that. So dissertation is a really interesting one. I hadn't really, looking back, I hadn't really made that deliberate link, right? But actually looking back at it, it was really helpful. I'd say definitely you need to be looking at the websites of these organizations, right, to understand what the graduate programs are, what the intake is, work out who to contact and what the entry point is. I was also going to say, as you, hopefully you'll secure an interview, right? But be looking at the annual reports of those businesses. So you're kind of thinking through, well, what are the challenges in these businesses? How do they stack up in terms of numbers? What kind of year have they had, etc. And then like with companies like Accenture, we publish points of view, and it's really helpful to read through those points of view and then come with your own perspective on that point of view into the interview if it's something that's relevant to you and of interest to you. And I think that shows that step above in terms of maturity, which is I'm reading, I'm really interested, I'm really keen, I'm intellectually interested in what you're saying, and my perspective on that is this, because we want people with an opinion, right? We want people that have got that, and ultimately our clients pay for us to give an opinion as well. So we don't want people that will just kind of sit back, read. We want people that are able to then say what their opinion is on what they've read.
Excellent. So some great advice in there in terms of some of those kind of initial research in terms of places to start, whether that be on company websites or whether that be through individuals on LinkedIn, and then how to build that kind of those networks through LinkedIn, through professional bodies, through events, to get that kind of greater understanding, to see where interests actually lie. We've had a couple of very kind of specific questions about particular qualifications or particular things. Are they helpful? Master's degree. How many, what's your thoughts in terms of the value added of a master's degree versus entry straight from an undergraduate degree? Or is this sort of not particularly an issue within the sector? I guess that's going to be an answer that depends, but let me turn that over to you. Nikki, do you want to come in on that first?
Yeah, in general, probably most people that I work with closely do have a master's. To be honest, there's a lot of people in the environment sector, environmental consulting, who do have a master's. It's not to say it's a prerequisite, and we certainly have people coming in, as I say, more through the graduate route, sort of specialised maybe slightly later, who come with an undergraduate degree. But I think, in my experience, if you have a particular interest in a specific area, specific technical area, like for me it was climate change, risk and resilience, and yes, a master's is valuable.
Caroline, what's your response to that? It might be slightly different, I anticipate.
Yeah, it is actually. So it's not a requirement, and actually we would prefer people not to have gone down such a specific route that they're then a bit blinkered to the world around them, because we need broad thinkers, right? So I would say, apart from very specific disciplines, it's definitely not a requirement for for what I do or for graduate entry. So I'd avoid becoming too niche almost.
So, but I as I said at the beginning, we've got quite different perspectives and quite different routes into this particular area, and I think we're starting to see the kind of the deeper technical specialists as opposed to the generalists who might be taking a different path. Paul, have you got anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I guess somewhere in between, helpfully or not. Yeah, when I was in consultancy, typically, as Nikki said, a master's was mostly required, I'd say, but certainly in kind of financial services where I am now, that's not necessarily the case. And indeed, we've got many people in the team that have come straight out with, strong first degrees, and not having masters and what have you, and a few of us with masters and kind of PhDs, but they're absolutely not a prerequisite. And actually, I would kind of counter Caroline's point a little bit to say that I think there is huge value in those masters. Not saying, Caroline, that you didn't think there was value in them, but I think there is a huge benefit in specialising in some of those subjects in more detail, because particularly when I've talked about ESG, environmental social governance type roles, I think being able to demonstrate particular expertise in a social aspect or from a governance or indeed an environmental perspective is highly valued. So yeah, it varies very much so.
We've been talking here primarily about kind of specialist, more technical subject knowledge masters. What about MAs in management consulting? There's a very specific question that's come in there. Caroline, would your answer still hold up?
Yeah, it would. I think you're better joining somewhere and getting your experience on the job rather than paying for a generic master's, would be my view. So get in there, get the experience. It's all about, in our jobs, working with people and building up the experience and the subject matter expertise in the job, I would say. So I think it's a great thing to do if you're interested and you've got the money to spend on the masters, but it's definitely not a requirement.
Great. So slightly different pathways here that we're signalling in terms of, and therefore slightly different routes. What about language skills? There's been a question also about second languages and developing language skills. Are those advantageous or? So
I've worked absolutely internationally. I think I've worked in every single continent, I think, apart from the Arctic, I think, but I've worked literally all over the world. And the international language of business is definitely English. So I've never felt, I think we're in a really privileged situation to be, to have English as a first language, right? So I think English is it's always beneficial if you could speak to someone in a second language, but it's definitely not a requirement because predominantly we're doing business in English.
Any different experience from Paul or Nikki?
I would say it's it's not essential, but it's certainly advantageous. I'm working with many companies in Europe at the moment, and being able to speak Spanish or French is it can be quite helpful. And having that kind of interpreter can be a bit of a challenge sometimes, and it can also feel a bit lazy at times, just being able to speak English as badly as I do. So I think it would be advantageous, certainly, but absolutely not a requirement.
Nikki, no dissent on that one.
Nothing really to add on that. It's certainly not required, and I don't speak any languages well enough to work in anything other than English, and that's all I've ever needed to work in. But so not required, not from a technical perspective, but like Paul said, I think it's never a bad thing, and particularly for making relationships and doing business internationally, it's never a bad thing.
And through the course of the comments you've made, you've started to draw out some of the exciting emerging opportunities. I mean, very broadly, sustainability, green finance, spatial finance, climate risk, these sorts of topics. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? Because these are obviously topics that many geographers are really interested in. So Paul, do you want to talk sort of about some of the exciting stuff that's going on in finance at the moment?
Yeah,
stuff to you.
Yeah, finance can be dull. Believe it or not.
Didn't say that.
We're all thinking it, but it's not. No, it's not, and particularly not in it's fair to say that kind of the field of sustainable finance, green finance is really booming, and there's incredible interest in this space, and not least kind of buoyed by the pandemic that we're kind of going through, and the kind of increasing focus upon the resilience of companies and organizations. I think there's been a real uptick, I think, in terms of ESG. I've used that term quite a lot, and increasingly, I think, as the kind of investor community, stakeholders are starting to kind of gear up and become more aware about ESG related issues. I think that's also forcing the hand to an extent of companies to start taking some of these ESG related issues quite seriously. And we're starting to see that. So at the moment, companies are being encouraged and their hands in a way forced to kind of report more transparently about how they are thinking about their environmental impact of their business, but also about how they treat their employees, both kind of directly and through their value chains as well. So there's a huge interest in ESG at the moment, and more generally around kind of green financing as well. So the growth of the green bond market has been kind of exponential, and we're seeing that increase as well, and we expect to see that continue to grow actually. So on the back of that, really, what we're seeing is, go into LinkedIn and type in ESG in the job section, and you'll see all manner of roles, related to ESG research, analytics, modelers, data scientists, but also kind of specialists like myself around adaptation and resilience and what have you. So there's, I think, sustainable investing, green finance, and ESG, huge opportunities, and it's the way that the market is going.
Nikki, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think over sort of the years I've been working in climate risk and resilience, there's definitely been a shift in the last few years around sort of thinking about climate risks. Previously, clients generally thinking about it in terms of physical risks to assets, to kind of stuff they own. How was flooding going to affect a power station, or how would drought affect water resource supply? I think there has been definitely a shift in the last few years about, those questions are still there, they're still valid, and people are still working on those, but we're getting questions now, like Paul says, more about how does climate affect, financially affect my business as a whole, how not just sort of the stuff I own and operate, but actually the performance of my business as a whole financially. Where am I going to get my where am I going to get capital from? How much is it going to cost me? Is that going to be affected by climate change, climate risk? So sort of the level at which the questions are being asked is sort of moving up, I guess, from the sort of the on the ground physical asset stuff to the up to the boardroom, really, with board asking, well, how is this going to affect us as a business, as an entity? So that's really exciting that shift is happening, and I think previously I would say that adaptation and risk and resilience was maybe seen as sort of part of the health, safety and environment type teams. So there's someone in the environment who does that, whereas now that's not the case at all. It is absolutely fundamental question at the board level. Many companies I work with have climate change as their number one risk on their corporate risk register, for example. This is a complete shift, really, I think, in how significantly client organisations take this.
Thank you. Caroline?
Well, I guess I'm less involved in this side of it, right? But we do absolutely have a sustainability practice. It's something we do look at. I'm less involved personally in it, though.
Are you seeing any other themes that are sort of starting to emerge, in the sense that this is obviously one particular realm in which management consultancies are working? It's obviously the realm that Nikki and Paul are both experts in, but more generally across the portfolio of projects that you're working on, clients you're working with, are there any other emerging trends that are sort of coming through there?
Yeah, so I guess particularly in what I see, so I focus very much around, developing the workforce of the future. So there are massive trends about how do we new skill people from, existing roles into new roles. How do we understand the work of the future? Yeah, so big trends around, actually the type of work that we do is changing. And I mean that across all organizations, right? Not just management consultancy, but the work is changing. How do we understand the work of the future? What will be automated versus where do we need personal skills? That coupled with digital and digital awareness, digital skills, is very much where we're thinking where this is going in all the work we do, right? They're constant themes, I would say.
Great, no, thank you. Yeah, again, stretching it in lots of nice different directions in terms of issues to be engaged with. There was a question in the chat, which I think is a really good one, actually, which is probably a little bit about kind of work-life balance and pressures. Working for private consultancy companies with financial targets, with targets associated with them, what's that like in terms of the pressure that puts on you as employees, or in terms of that kind of culture of work in the environments you're working in? Anyone want to take that question?
Yeah, I'll take that. Yeah, that's true. I work for a commercial organisation. Mott MacDonald is slightly different to maybe some other consultancies in that it's employee owned, so we don't have quite the sort of the same setup as a shareholder owned entity. But yeah, there are financial and commercial targets. You know, teams are expected to bring in a certain amount of work and deliver a certain amount of profit. I think, you know, the question is about individual targets. I mean, for me personally, I don't have an individual target. Some organisations are set up that way and may have individual targets, but for me that's not the case. It's at a team level, and that, you know, there is flexibility within that, you know, because you're working at a team level. I'm very fortunate at the moment in my role that I have time carved out for me to do some of the non-project or kind of revenue generating activities. I have time to do business development, to go and speak to clients, to attend events and thought leadership. So, you know, my role is quite balanced, and some of it is, you know, is commercial and it is about bringing in fee earning work, but some of it is also about sort of the non-fee earning side.
Caroline, do you have observations you want to make on that question?
Yeah, so sales and I guess targets is very much part of what we do, but it's a trade that we learn over the years, right? So when you come into an organization as an analyst or consultant at more junior levels, then you know, we've got chargeability targets, which is how much time are you billing to clients, but you don't have kind of commercial and financial targets at more junior levels. That changes as you move senior manager, managing director, right, where you do have those targets. But it's a trade that you learn over the years, right, which is how to work with clients, to solution things, to, you know, sell appropriate work. So you know, a big part of what we do is sales and is commercially and financially aware, right, of the fact that we are doing business, right? But I wouldn't say that it feels an overhead where, you know, I'm you know, so nervous that I can't do my job kind of thing. It's, you know, it's part of what we do. It's part of our trade, right? Yeah.
Paul, anything to add?
Yeah, so I think so. In the first case, for S&P Global, we split out our analytical and our commercial functions because clearly there's a conflict of interest in terms of providing a credit rating and someone paying for it. So those functions are split out, and that means that I sit in our analytical part of the business, and that's great in the sense that I don't get involved in any of the finances, don't have any targets in that sense at all. So I can just get my head down and focus on the technical work, which is what I enjoy doing. So I don't have any, you know, timesheets I have to submit every week or hit any targets, you know, apart from your own kind of personal development type targets that you would set with your manager, as any good company would do. So that's quite good. And also, whilst there might be a slight kind of, you know, stigma about perhaps working in financial services and seeing people working fairly hard, you know, I'm not working in investment banking. I'm not working 22 hours a day and sleeping in the office. Not that I can anyway. So so no, there is that kind of work-life balance is very much maintained, and they're kind of not having those specific targets for myself personally.
Great, thank you. I think that's very reassuring across the piece, probably for the person who was asking that question. You've mentioned through the course of the questions some kind of really specific advice to undergraduates, the bulk of our audience here in this particular event, in terms of things that they can be doing as part of their degree, around their degree, thinking about their dissertations, starting to do research on LinkedIn, looking at company websites, talking to the career service, all of those sorts of things. Is there any other kind of advice that you'd like to offer, particularly undergraduates at this stage, in terms of what they can be doing through the course of their degree or around their degree, to really kind of explore opportunities to get themselves in the best particular place that they can be for when they're coming to applying for a role? Or have we kind of covered off most of the pieces of advice that you'd want to offer at this stage?
I mean, I'd certainly suggest, you know, that if it's possible as part of the degree programs, to, you know, think about specialising perhaps in certain modules. So, you know, I've talked around kind of ESG more generally, but clearly, you know, any modules that if you're interested in around kind of finance, environmental economics, sustainable finance, climate finance, adaptation, resilience, natural capital accounting, all those sorts of things will give you a great, you know, grounding in this space. So I'd certainly encourage that. And at the same time, there are a variety of online courses available through various organisations that you can kind of pick up online. The focus on sustainable finance, for example, as well, and that's no bad thing to start looking at those as well.
Caroline, anything to add that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I was just thinking about like using alumni groups as well from your university, which is, are there connections back to people like us on the call today that, went to your university, went to your college, etc., that you could actually have that personal connection with? Because I think that's helpful. So we get any LinkedIn profile requests, right, each week, and I think it's always useful to have that personal connection. And I think it will help you understand as well the actual, day in the life of that job, the more people you speak to, so that, should you be offered an interview, then you can be more and more to point and really understand the job, right? So I think that's a big part of it, understanding what a day in the life of these types of jobs, what they do, so you're really current and really relevant when you come to interview.
That's really good advice, and I think for certainly people on the webinar who might be a little bit nervous about making that first approach, I think that's an easier way to make that first approach, isn't it? And most departments now do have well-developed networks of alumni, and certainly could put you in touch if that was of interest. Nikki, anything else you'd like to add?
I think, yeah, I mean, I've spoken mostly about my kind of route as a fairly technical specialist, but I think just to sort of counter that and say, certainly consultancy, don't worry too much if you don't know exactly what it is you want to specialise in at this point. Consultancy is a really, really broad sector. There are lots of different career paths once you get in, whether you want to be a technical specialist, which is sort of more the path I've gone down, whether you want to be a business development and more of a sort of sales specialist, you want to be a project manager, there are all these types of roles available, certainly within consultancy. So yeah, I guess counter to points about, don't worry.
I think that's a really good point, and that's why we put people into this analyst and consulting group, so they kind of get an experience and an apprenticeship before they're asked to specialise. So, it gives people a well-rounded experience, right, before saying, I want to be this or I want to be that. Yeah, you can join. And to be honest, that's why I've been with Accenture 20 years, which is just the range of experience is vast. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very good advice. And I think, for those who are attending, who either have a very specific idea or have a more general idea, these different pathways and routes allow you to explore that. And I think one of the things we all know now is that careers are much more fluid, they're much more mobile in terms of people moving between roles, moving between organizations. So, if you go down a particular path and it's not what you want to do, that doesn't, you can reorient and you can go in different
even within the same organization or to different organizations, right? I've done reinvention in people's careers is more and more prevalent, right? Moving between focus areas.
Fantastic, great. I'm conscious we're coming up to about 10 to 2, and you're very generously given lots of time and some fantastic advice, which is really appreciated. Maybe we'll just go once more around the room to Nikki, to Caroline, and then to Paul for any kind of last piece of advice, something you want to kind of just repeat again, stress, or something you haven't had an opportunity to say so far, just before we close off the discussion. So Nikki first, then Caroline, and then Paul.
I'll pass on a piece of advice that I heard recently that resonated with me, and that was, don't be afraid to ask questions. People actually want to talk about what they do and they want to help, and don't be shy. People generally really want to talk about what they do and mostly why they're in it, and just ask questions.
Fantastic, that's wonderful and encouraging as well. So thank you very much. Caroline.
I think related in a way, be curious, have the mindset that's open to change, open to challenge, open to ask questions, right? And you'll be amazed that if you're thinking, what does that thing mean? Probably someone else is thinking the same. And even after 20 years, I have to ask questions in meetings which is, can you explain that again? What does that mean, right? And showing that vulnerability, which is, you can ask questions to learn. You've got to be curious, I would say. So that's what I would add to that.
Excellent. And Paul, the last word.
Last word, a slightly longer piece of advice, if I can. I remember that something that stuck with me when I was an undergraduate, possibly. I heard a talk, and there's a particular reference to a study looking at this kind of 60-30-10 model. It might have been by IBM. I can't remember exactly, but it essentially was looking at what are the secrets for career success, whether that's the first job, a new job, promotion, etc. And essentially that 60-30-10 model was saying that 60% of the time, your network, your visibility, how visible you are was a determinant, the primary determinant of your career success. 30% was what essentially people say about you when you're out of the room. Paul was really good at this. He knows about X, Y, and Z. And then lastly, the 10% was hard work. And the point being, therefore, that just getting your head down and working hard might not necessarily always get you exactly where you want to be. So, just re-emphasising that importance of being visible and networking by way of a final word.
Fantastic. So ask, be curious, and be visible. Those three good pieces of advice to distill out of that. But I just want to thank all of you again for being so generous with your time and expertise and sharing some really insightful comments. So thank you very, very much. For everyone who's attended, thank you too. We know that you too are very busy. As I said at the beginning, we'll be sending an email with links to more resources, to remind us about future events, and also a request for quick feedback so that we can make these events as useful as possible. We'll also be including some information about the Society and resources. Nikki made the comment earlier on about attending events, being part of networks, kind of learning through that. The Society has lots of free events that you can access, so I encourage you to do that. So do make the most of all of these. But thank you again for attending, and hope you have a good afternoon and a good rest of the week. So thank you very much.